Welcome to this limited series podcast, The Cost of Sex. As a direct result of Sri Lanka's civil war, there are many women who don't have the economic means to support their families. Some have chosen or been forced to take up sex work due to circumstances during and after the conflict. While economic conditions are one possible cause of sex work, there are many other reasons why women enter into and stay in the commercial sex industry. This situation, of course, has been further deepened by the economic, social, ethno-political issues that have marred Sri Lanka since the civil war, making the impact of conflict continue to affect the survival choices of women long after it ended in 2009. For women, both cis and trans women, the legacies of conflict continue to make sex work a dangerous and insecure profession. In this episode, Dangerous Sex, we want to talk about the stories of three women. We want to talk to Paba from the Grassrooted Trust and the Sex Workers and Allies in South Asia network about the impact of conflict on sex work in Sri Lanka. Paba, during the war as in now, describe to me the quote-unquote average sex worker.
I am going to base a lot of my answers on the study that we conducted in 2022. It's called The Status of Sex Workers in Sri Lanka. This report indicates that an average women sex worker is between the ages of 26 and 50. They all come from humble backgrounds such as urban poor, farming communities, fishery communities, or day laborers. Some are married or in long-term relationships. Some have temporary husbands. Many of them are widowed or abandoned, but in generally they function as the breadwinners of their families. They leave their children to go to work. So interesting thing that a sex worker mentioned during the launch of the status report, a journalist asked sex workers what kind of relationship that they have with their children when they go to work to do sex work, and does it affect the relationship between the mother and the child. Then the sex workers, how they answered this question was really empowering to listen to. She said, any woman who goes to work will have to leave their children with somebody. They'll live with their parents or neighbors or relatives, whoever. Will have to, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a sex worker or daily wage earner or domestic worker, you can't take your children to work. So sex workers are also like the other mothers. Every mother is the same, is the point that the sex workers made that day. I thought it's very interesting. So according to the report, Status of Sex Workers report, sex workers, average number of dependents they have in families is 2 to 5. This actually includes younger children, breastfeeding children, husbands who are unable to work, disabled parents, old age parents. So they average sex worker is also average woman in Sri Lanka. That's what we've seen across the country.
This is the story of a woman from Polonnaruwa district. She is a Sinhalese mother of two in her late 40s from a border village. She has experienced the terrors of living with war as a child and continues to live close to the war zone throughout her marriage and after her husband disappeared without a trace. She endured harassment and sexual bribery as a widow with children to support. We join her story at the point when she became a sex worker, almost by accident.
When we were like that, he went to town one day and then he disappeared. We tried to find him, telegrammed everywhere, went to the police. But there is no trace of him. I don't even have a death certificate. Then the government said that they will compensate widows, but I have never got anything like that. When I used to go to the police, they would ask for my number. They call. They come over saying they will help me find my husband. After my husband disappeared, I was with a policeman. He said he would marry me. For a year, I had a relationship with him. He would come secretly to me at home without any of the villagers knowing. Then I found out that he was married and had 2 children. I stopped it immediately. There was no point in lying to myself. Shopkeepers would give me free food. I used to think they were helping me out of pity because I had no husband. But they started saying, "Come here, come there." I had to go with them because I needed money. No one just helps a woman without expecting anything back.
It's very interesting to hear how she took control over what she does, and over time, sex work also became something that is providing. And with the phone, she can have scheduled meetings with clients. All these things made it easier, so she could take control of her life, her finances, and her children's education. And she emerged as the self-sufficient woman with some kind of agency. During the war, sex workers had clientele that were civilians as well as from the military, army, or the police, who were the greater percentage of their clientele. Sex work during conflict was not restricted to those who lived close to war zones, so many women traveled extensively to find work. They had to cross many barriers, ethnic barriers, language barriers, and as well as the physical barriers, such as going through checkpoints in and out of these war zones. In this process, they have experienced acts of conflict related sexual violence, and having to travel in and out of war zones, conflict zones, it made them more vulnerable to sexual violence.
This is the story of a Tamil woman from Kilinochchi. She had struggled between Colombo and the north as a sex worker throughout the war to support her displaced and scattered family. Her experiences of travel in the area of heavy militarization as a sex worker and a member of a minority community shows just how much travel and the harassment that comes with it was part of the realities of war for sex workers. We join her story at the point where she is crossing a checkpoint.
I came to Colombo, rented a small room in Slave Island, and continued to do sex work here. Those days, people suffered a lot at the hands of the LTTE. Jaffna, Kilinochchi. These places were like cemeteries during the war. They would torture people, they would kill people, and bury them there. But by living through it, we had gotten used to all of that. There was always the sound of explosions. But in Colombo, it was not like that then. We had peace here. Sex work was our job. But at least when we came home, we had peace and we had a place to stay. Sometimes when we collected enough money, we would try to return to Kilinochchi to see our families. It would get late by the time we got there, and they would not let us in after 6 or 7 p.m. Then we would end up staying outside. Some LTTE personnel were kind-hearted. We begged them to see our children, and they would speak to their superior officers and let us through. When we leave from Colombo to Jaffna or Kilinochchi, there were at least 6 or 7 major checkpoints that we needed to get through. They asked us where we were coming from and what job we do. We never tell them that we are sex workers. If we tell them that, they would harass us. So we don't tell them the truth. At each checkpoint, the army would ask us the same questions. When they searched us, they would touch our bodies unnecessarily.
We know that some chose sex work, and I understand that this choice for some was really no choice at all. I also know that for most people, this choice was a viable financial choice. But Paba, was violence in their childhood or youth ever a trigger to becoming a sex worker?
There is no constructive evidence to actually show if you face violence, you become a sex worker. But the reality is that when women and girls at young age, when they are raped or face sexual violence, they are made to think that they are worthless. Their body has been used. So there's nothing that they can do beyond having sex, and their self-esteem is crushed. So this is true for women and girls who have faced sexual violence in conflict settings, because sex becomes a bartering system for better plate of food, a good bottle of drinking water, or even better shelter. And in these settings, the sexual violence is so normalized to provide and protect your family for many women. Therefore, even after they come out of these settings, because in a refugee camp or conflict settings, there are limitations on what they can achieve, what they can learn, the opportunities are very restricted. So when they come out of these settings also, it becomes this courageous choice that they make to stay in sex work, because as you said earlier, this is the only viable income that they create for their family. At the end of the day, what matters women is survival. So regardless of what cultural and religious norms say, women choose to stay in sex work because that is the only viable choice for them.
This is a story of a Muslim woman from Jaffna. When she visited the detention camp where her brothers were kept, she was abused as a child. We pick up her story as she explains how it all started. She's living with the trauma of those memories, and even as a sex worker needs to negotiate her need for some resolution for what happened to her against her basic needs for survival today.
They touched my body here and there. They have touched me many times. If I say I'm going to tell my mother, they signal to me that they are going to hit me on the head. They say that they will shoot my brother and kill him if I say anything. When the army did this to me, I was 12 or 13 years old. They would have raped me around 10 times. 2 people did this. One was inside and one was outside. When one leaves, the other would come. They were wearing the army uniform. One of them was a lot older. There was a place that looked like where they slept. They had a mat there. There was also a bed-like wooden plank. They would push me onto the ground and do this. I didn't know what they were doing to me. I didn't know anything. They asked me to stand and take my underwear off. And if I said no, they would beat me on the head. I wanted to live for my 2 children. We were hungry and had no food. After that, I went down this disrespectful path of life and provided for my children. I was about 24 years when I started. I had a friend. She was the one who introduced me to this. I was hesitant because I was afraid the kids might find out. But she reassured me and said that it would be okay, and this is what she is doing as well. After that, I got used to going there. I told her I will come. I tell my mother I'm going to do housework and go. When I come back, I bring things. My mother asks if the housework is hard. I tell her that it's not hard.
During the war, nearly all women interviewed for this project, now between the ages of 45 to 70 years old, have suffered one or a combination of many types of violence. Sexual harassment while traveling, rape, or gang rape when one person hires her and then a few of his friends turn up. When clients abscond without paying, torture when they're burned or bitten or beaten, underage rape when children are trafficked, are some of the stories that we have heard. How did these women talk about the violence that they have experienced?
Sex workers themselves don't often consider the violence as above and beyond, because many believe that it comes with the job. But as we speak to them, even during this documentation, women were able to understand what happened to them is not a part of their job. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, if you take a look at the informal sector, many women go through sexual harassment, but most of them are unable to complain or even speak about it due to the fear of losing their job or due to the fear of being re-victimized. For sex workers, this is even more true because sex work is perceived as a criminalized act. Therefore, if you go to a police to complain about it, about client violence, that they may have to face violence at the police station also. And the common perception that you can do anything to a sex worker acts against their access to justice.
So, what can we do as their society for them?
Well, first of all, I think we can listen, we can understand, and most importantly, we can leave our judgment behind. The pain, humiliation, and violence that they have endured is more than anyone could or should bear. Sex work is still perceived as a criminal offense in Sri Lanka, and it is this criminalization, whether they are street-based, home-based, or brothel-based sex workers, affects their ability to support themselves and their families in a way that is physically and emotionally healthy and safe. It also affected how and if women sex workers are able to come forward to go to the police or access legal services or justice for the sexual abuse that they have endured during conflict. To make sex work safe for women, decriminalization of sex work is a very important milestone. To do that, we have to understand that sex is not only for reproduction, sex is also for pleasure, and having sex for pleasure brings a variety of health benefits. By understanding this, it will help us get rid of these judgments or even unlearn certain things that we have learned about sex work. And that is what is going to help towards decriminalization.
The complexities of sex work during the conflict extend beyond that historical moment. It highlights how simplistic notions of right and wrong, helplessness and choice, visibility and invisibility are complicated considerations for sex workers. The stories revealed not just why they chose sex work, but why they chose to stay in it, because it offers them a lucrative and sometimes only choice. It is not just for the money or the lack of opportunity for some, it is because it allows them to exercise their own agency. It is because it allows them flexibility of time and location for their work, the ability to manage motherhood, family, and being a breadwinner. It's also because they already feel that they're on the margins of society. In a way, this allows them to exist in this gray area and seek out a steady income, sisterhood at work, and for some, even stolen moments of pleasure and care. In episode 2, Blind Justice, of this limited series podcast, The Cost of Sex, we follow their stories to see what legal choices they have and how their lives could be made safer. Thank you, Paba, for joining us for today's episode, and thank you all for listening.